My name is Toshira R. I'm the deputy director at My Sister's Place, which is a DC-based domestic violence organization, and we provide a continuum of care for survivors of domestic violence. Then I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But how I came to the work is I'm actually a teacher by trade. My undergraduate and graduate degree are in education, elementary education to be specific. And in teaching, I found that it's really difficult to help students who are struggling at home. And a lot of those struggles are sometimes being in violent homes, not having the care that they need, or really being confused about what love is. And I found myself dedicating a lot of time to my students' personal lives rather than their education. And in doing that, I started volunteering. And this is when I lived in a different state. And so when I moved to the District of Columbia, I was teaching and found myself in the same place, seeing young people with a lot of turmoil at home. And I began volunteering with My Sister's Place, doing some parenting and education advocacy for the clients, and eventually began to work at the shelter as a residential counselor. So working with the clients there, overseeing, the shelter during my shifts and making sure everything was safe, and eventually moved to work to creating a hotline with them. They already had a hotline, but they did another hotline, a citywide hotline around domestic violence. And then became their shelter program manager, director of programs, and now deputy director. And so I've seen multi facets of the organization, from overseeing the shelter to what it takes to maintain programs like this and helping survivors recover. In the 70s, big women's movement, big movement around women's rights and safety. And during that time, the Women's Defense League Fund, a group of women came together with that fund to put together actually a hotline in, I believe it was maybe 1976. I think I might have that right. I might be off by a year, in 1976. And in doing that hotline and looking to see what resources were available to survivors, one thing that was a common theme is that survivors needed to leave. And so a few years later, 1979, I believe, 1979 is when they established a shelter that had 15 rooms where women could come to flee and get on their feet. And some years later, what they found was many women, one of the barriers to leaving is that they have children and they weren't going to leave their children with an abuser. And so in 2010, the shelter was expanded such that women could bring their children. And so it became a women and children shelter. In the beginning, it was really considered a safe house. So it still is an undisclosed location. It's still, we have security cameras and things as such. And it was considered a safe house. But the thing is that we have been there for about 40 years. And so it's not to say that it's a secret that it's there, and it may not even be a secret what we do there, but what we do is we try to maintain confidentiality. What that means is we don't let anyone know who we're serving there. So you wouldn't know if you were asking, oh, hey, is Toshira at the shelter? We're not going to confirm or deny that I'm seeking services at that shelter, to maintain confidentiality and keep them safe. But it was created to meet a need, to meet a need around gender-based violence, that, to call a hotline and have no place to go and no resources to use was a moot point. And at that point, it's just emotional support, but the women needed more than that. They needed a place that they could come get their things and their affairs in order, so that way they can begin a next step of living a life free of violence. Still 15, we still serve 15 families at any one time, on average about 90 days or so. So in the average year, we serve 45 to 54 families, or women, I should say, and with their families per year. with that program. This last year is a good example of a year that there were many more barriers to leaving the shelter. And so this last year, we served a little less than 40 families. Whereas, but typically on average, we're around 45 families per year being served at the shelter. So we do have programming specifically for children at our shelter. As it relates to education in school, there's actually a law or statute, McKinney-Vento, I can't remember the year, but it allows children to continue their school in their school or in their area, regardless of where they live, because of being classified as homeless. And so we have had children who maybe have some special needs, and we can get bus arrangements where they can be bused to that school. Alternatively, what we can do is if the client no longer wants to risk going into an area that might be dangerous to them, or maybe the abuser or perpetrator knows that the school is where they'll find the family, we work with them to get them into the local school or school that's near them or safer or safest for them. As it relates to what we do for the clients or for the children at the shelter, we have after school programming. So we have structured play groups, homework help. We also, do things as small as birthday parties for their birthdays. We partner with a project called Homeless Children's Playtime Project, but there are other places, I'm sure, where they come and actually play with the children after school, so that way they have some respite and that mother has respite to maybe eat in peace or take a shower while their child is being attended to. We also do outings. We have services coming into, we have an art therapist as well that works in group and on an individual basis with the children to begin to address the trauma and talk about coping. But as it relates to school, there are some laws around that help. But for those who don't necessarily want to pursue or continue to go to the school that they were going to, we just very easily get their documents transferred. We have a family advocate that works with the family to help that happen seamlessly and smoothly as possible within that time that they're with us.